silent hill on a lonely planet covered with silver dust and broken rocks. There lived a man named Eli. He had been alone for many years. His small shelter made of metal scraps stood at the edge of a long valley. No one came this far anymore, no ships landed here. No voices echoed across the dry plains. Only the wind spoke, whispering through hollow hills like a ghost. Eli had stopped counting the days. His world was silent, except for the small sound of his tools as he repaired old machines just to keep himself busy. But one morning, when the twin suns rose together for the first time in weeks, something changed. He saw movement in the distance. Small and uncertain at first, he thought it was a mirage, heat shimmer playing tricks again. But when he looked through his old scope, his breath caught in his throat. It was a girl, not human. Her skin shimmered like faint silver under sunlight, her eyes large and soft with a deep blue glow. She moved slowly, dragging broken metal pieces toward a small clearing near the valley. She was building something. Eli couldn't tell what. From that day, he began to watch her every evening. Hidden behind the ridge, she worked in silence, never resting for long. Sometimes she stopped and stared at the sky for hours, as if waiting for someone to appear among the stars. She didn't know Eli was watching. She didn't know that someone else existed on this forgotten world. Eli had seen aliens before, traders, soldiers, refugees, but never one like her. She looked young, maybe just reaching adulthood in her species. Her movements were graceful, careful, but filled with sadness. Each time she carried heavy metal, she trembled slightly as if her strength was fading. Yet she never gave up. Eli wondered what she was doing. Was she building a home or repairing her crashed ship? He saw no other wreckage, no fire, no smoke. Only her, alone against the wind at night. She made a small fire from glowing stones, strange blue flames that hummed instead of crackling. Eli watched from afar. The warmth of that light reached him, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. Days passed. Every morning, she gathered stones and old metal parts from the desert. Every night she arranged them into circles. Perfect. Precise. Sometimes she sang in a soft voice, in a language Eli didn't understand. It wasn't music like humans knew. It was low and trembling, like the sound of the sea in a shell, even from a distance. It made his heart ache. One evening, the wind carried her song closer. He sat on the hill listening until the sun sank below the ridge. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was here, but he felt drawn to her, as if her loneliness spoke to his own. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her thin hand stacking stones, about the way she always looked at the stars. He remembered how he once waited for rescue too. When his ship crashed years ago, no one came for him either. The next day, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He cooked extra food. He wrapped it in cloth and carried it to the edge of the valley. When she went to the far side to collect metal, he quietly left the food near her camp and walked away. He didn't expect her to notice, but when he returned the next morning, the food was gone. In its place on the ground lay a small piece of polished metal, shiny and curved like a mirror. Eli picked it up carefully. It was smooth, carved with strange markings. Maybe her way of saying thanks. He smiled. Something warm moved inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. From that day, he began to leave small things near her camp. Fruit, clean water, bits of cloth. She never showed herself, but every time, she left something in return. A crystal, a shell, a blue feather. An unspoken friendship began, built without words, without contact. Just quiet acts of kindness shared between two lonely beings. But Eli still couldn't stop wondering. What was she building? The structure was growing now, taller each day. It wasn't a house. It had no roof, no doors, just high curved walls made from smooth metal and carved stones. He saw her trace glowing lines on them every night with her hands. The symbols pulsed faintly, like they were alive. Sometimes she would stop working and stare at the largest stone in the center. Her fingers would tremble, and her head would bow even from far away. Eli could see her shoulders shaking. She was crying, and though he didn't understand why, it broke something inside him. He wanted to go to her, to ask if she was all right. But fear held him back. Maybe she would attack. Maybe she didn't trust humans. He had seen enough alien wars to know not all species liked his kind. So he stayed hidden, watching as the wind howled and the stars rose above them both. One night, as the twin moons climbed high, she stopped building. She stood on the ridge, hands clasped together looking up. Her voice trembled as she whispered something into the night sky. A message meant for someone far away. Eli watched in silence, and deep down, a strange thought entered his mind. Maybe she wasn't building a home at all. Maybe she was building a way to go home. The distance between stars. The next morning, the valley was filled with fog. Eli woke to a strange humming sound rolling through the air like thunder trapped beneath the sand. He climbed the ridge quickly, heart racing down below. The alien girl stood before her half-built structure, both hands glowing blue. Lines of light ran across the stones like veins of fire, connecting in perfect circles. She was making it come alive. Eli watched, mesmerized. The symbols pulsed faster, the air shimmered, and for a moment he thought the stars themselves were answering her. Then suddenly the light vanished. The girl fell to her knees, breathing hard, her shoulders shaking. Whatever she had tried to do had failed. Eli hesitated, his hands trembling. He wanted to help, but he knew she didn't trust him yet, so instead, he left a small canister of purified water near her camp again. When he came back later, it was gone, but this time, something different waited for him. A small stone tablet. On it, carved with alien symbols, was a pattern that looked almost like a thank you. That night, Eli sat beside his tiny heater. He stared at the glowing pattern on the tablet, wondering if she could somehow understand him too. He whispered softly, "You're not alone," even though he knew she couldn't hear him. Still, the words felt good to say. For days he continued to watch her from a distance. She worked tirelessly, collecting strange crystals from the cliffs and arranging them around the structure. Sometimes she lifted her face to the sky, lips moving in silent prayer or plea. It was as if she was calling to someone far away, someone lost among the stars. And every time her voice faded into the wind, Eli felt a deep ache in his chest. He understood that feeling too well. He remembered when he first crashed on this planet. He had also built fires every night, hoping a ship would see the smoke. He had also whispered names into the dark, names of people he loved but would never see again. Now watching her, he felt that old wound open once more. But this time it didn't feel empty, it felt shared. One evening, he saw her sitting on the ground near her structure. Her face was pale, and her hands shook as she tried to eat a piece of dried plant. He realized then she was starving. Eli returned to his camp and packed extra food. This time he didn't just leave it quietly. He waited, hiding behind the rocks to see if she would take it. When she finally noticed the bundle, she froze. Her bright eyes scanned the valley, searching for whoever left it. Eli stepped out slowly, raising his hands to show peace. The alien girl tensed, her body glowing faintly, but she didn't move. He placed the food on a stone and stepped back. Then he pointed to the sky, then to her, then to the food, and trying to say, "For you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then cautiously she approached, picked up the food, and gave a short nod. It was small, but it was the first time she acknowledged him. Eli smiled when he turned to leave. He heard a soft sound. Her voice, a word quiet and broken. Maybe his name, or maybe her own language's word for thanks, and he didn't understand. But his heart did. After that day, something changed. She no longer avoided him completely. Sometimes she worked while he gathered rocks nearby, pretending not to watch each other. Once, when a dust storm swept through the valley, she helped him secure his solar panels before taking shelter. No words, only quick, understanding gestures. And when the storm ended, she gave him another token, a shard of crystal shaped like a teardrop. Eli placed it near his bed and smiled whenever it caught the light. For the first time in years, he began to sleep peacefully. But something else kept troubling him. Every night before sleeping, she would climb to the top of her structure and raise her hands toward the sky. She whispered softly, her voice trembling. Eli could feel the pain in it. He didn't need to understand the words. He recognized that desperate tone of someone calling home. The same one he once had. One night, he stayed up longer than usual. The stars were bright, and the air was cold enough to make his breath visible. He saw her kneeling before the structure again, eyes closed, hands glowing faintly. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The structure flashed and released a faint beam of blue light upward. It faded quickly, but Eli knew what it was. A signal. She was trying to send a message, he realized then. She wasn't building a home at all. She was building a beacon, a way to reach her people, to tell them she was still alive. But every attempt failed. Her energy was running out. Her supplies were gone, and yet she refused to give up. Eli watched her for a long time. He admired her courage, her strength and her silence in a universe that had abandoned both of them. She still had hope. It was something he had lost long ago. He whispered to himself, maybe she's what I was waiting for. The next morning, when he woke, he made a decision. He packed tools, wires, and parts from his broken transmitter. If she was trying to send a signal, maybe together they could make it stronger. He didn't know if she would accept his help, but he had to try because sometimes, even between stars, a small act of courage can change everything. As he stepped out into the rising twin suns, the valley glowed gold and blue somewhere beyond the dunes. She was already working again, and Eli smiled, because for the first time in years, he wasn't walking toward loneliness, he was walking toward hope, the unspoken bond. The next dawn came quiet and heavy with mist. Eli walked down into the valley carrying a small bag filled with broken machine parts. He didn't know what he would say, or if she would even listen. But he knew one thing. He couldn't watch her struggle alone anymore. When he reached her camp, the alien girl was already awake, kneeling beside the circle of stones. Her hands traced faint light symbols that flickered weakly before fading away. She looked tired, her movements slow, her shoulders trembling as if every breath hurt. Eli stood a few steps away and softly tapped a metal pipe against a rock. The sound echoed gently through the valley. She turned, eyes glowing faintly blue. For a tense moment, neither moved. Eli slowly lifted the bag, then knelt and opened it, showing her the parts. He pointed to her structure, then to himself, then nodded. It was a simple gesture. I can help. She hesitated, her eyes scanning him carefully. Then, to his surprise, she gave a small nod. Eli's heart skipped for the first time. They would work together. They spent hours in silence. He handed her wires. She connected them with glowing threads of her own energy. Whenever he didn't understand what to do, she guided his hands, sometimes their fingers brushed, and each time a strange warmth ran through him. Even though they didn't share a language, something deeper began to form. Trust. The structure started to change. Eli realized it wasn't just a beacon anymore. It was something sacred. The base shaped like wings, the top open to the sky. The symbols on the stones seemed to tell a story. Of her people, her family, maybe even her lost world. It wasn't just technology, it was memory. As the twin suns began to set, they stopped to rest. Eli offered her a bottle of water. She took it carefully, sniffed it, then drank. Her face softening slightly. She looked at him and touched her chest. Whispering a single word, Lyra, Eli repeated it. Lyra, she smiled faintly. A small, tired smile, but it reached her eyes. Then she pointed at him, her brows raising. He understood. She wanted to know his name. Eli, he said, touching his chest. She nodded, repeating softly, Eli. It sounded different in her accent and almost musical. That single exchange felt like a bridge between two worlds. They worked again the next day and the next. Each sunrise brought them closer, not with words but through shared silence. When a storm swept across the plains, they held the structure together, hands gripping cold metal as the wind roared. When the storm finally passed, the structure still stood. Glowing faintly under the silver rain, Lyra looked at Eli and made a soft sound. Laughter. Light and trembling, he laughed too. And for the first time, the valley didn't feel empty, but the peace didn't last one night. Eli woke to the sound of crying. He climbed the ridge and saw Lyra sitting before the structure. Head bowed, the light from her hands glowed weakly, forming ghostly shapes in the air. Faces, moving shadows. He realized what he was seeing. Memories. The faces were of her people, her family, lost in the crash. The structure wasn't just a beacon, it was a memorial, a way to keep their spirits alive among the stars. Eli felt a lump in his throat. He understood now why she never stopped working, why she looked at the sky each night. She wasn't just hoping for rescue. She was mourning. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough for her to see him. Lyra froze but didn't move away. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her with words she wouldn't understand. Instead, he simply sat beside her, silent. For a long time, they both stared at the glowing memories. The night was cold, but it felt strangely peaceful. When the images faded, Lyra wiped her eyes and turned toward him. Her voice was small, broken. She said something softly, but he didn't understand still. Her tone carried meaning, gratitude. Trust, maybe even sorrow shared, he nodded slowly, whispering, "You're not alone anymore." She didn't know the words, but she understood his heart. Her hand reached out and touched his arm gently. It was the first time she had touched him willingly. The days that followed felt different. They worked together easily now, fixing, building, sharing food and warmth. Eli repaired her old tools while she taught him how to draw light symbols that stored energy. Sometimes they sat quietly as stars filled the night. Lyra hummed soft songs that made the air shimmer like water. And Eli found himself dreaming again, dreaming of a life beyond silence. But he also began to notice something strange. The structure's light was fading faster each night. Lyra's skin had grown paler, her movements weaker. Each time she used her energy to activate the runes, it seemed to drain her life. Eli tried to stop her, tried to tell her to rest, but she only shook her head and smiled. Then she placed her hand on his chest and whispered one word. Promise. He didn't understand fully, but he felt what she meant. Promise you'll finish it. If I cannot, Eli nodded, his throat tight that night. He stayed awake beside the structure, watching her sleep for the first time. Her face looked peaceful under the pale moons. And as he looked at the half-finished beacon glowing softly, he knew this wasn't just her memorial anymore. It was their creation, a bridge between two lonely souls from different stars. When dawn arrived, Lyra opened her eyes and smiled faintly at him. "Eli," she whispered. He smiled back. "Lyra." The wind carried their names together across the valley, and though neither of them spoke the same language, they both understood one truth. Sometimes, the deepest connection in the universe needs no words at all. The gift of fire. The nights were colder now. Winds swept across the silver desert, carrying the chill of forgotten storms. Eli sat near the structure, watching the soft blue glow fade with every passing evening. Lyra worked quietly beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to trace one last symbol. The light flickered, then went out completely. She sighed softly and lowered her head. Her energy was nearly gone. Eli could see it in her pale eyes. The same blue light that once shone bright was dimming. He stood and walked to his small camp, returning with a box of old tools and wires. She looked up in confusion as he set them beside her. He pointed to the dark beacon, then to himself, then smiled. She tilted her head, then gave a small nod, and together they began to rebuild again. Hours passed as they worked side by side under the starlight. Eli connected cables and Lyra fused them with her faint energy. Her glowing fingers moved like an artist's brush. He realized she wasn't just repairing a machine. She was creating something sacred, her way of keeping the memory of her people alive. When their work was done for the night, Eli opened a small metal box. Inside were old ignition coils and a single spark battery. He gathered stones and made a small circle. Lyra watched with curious eyes as he struck the metal and sparks leapt out. Flames bloomed, real, warm, golden fire. Lyra gasped softly. The light dancing in her wide eyes, she reached out slowly. Letting the warmth touch her hands, for a moment she froze, as if she didn't believe it was real. Then she smiled, in a true unguarded smile, the kind that made the cold night vanish. Eli chuckled quietly. "This," he said, pointing to the fire, "is warmth." Lyra watched his lips move, repeating the word clumsily. Warmth. Her accent wrapped around it like music. Eli nodded proudly. He didn't realize until that moment how much he had missed simple human connection. Teaching, sharing, laughing. They sat together beside the flames. Lyra began to hum softly, her voice like wind over glass. The sound wrapped around the firelight and made it shimmer faintly blue. Eli listened in silence, feeling peace settle over him. It was strange. Two beings from different worlds sharing one fire under the same stars. And yet it felt completely natural. Later that night, Eli noticed her tracing patterns in the sand beside the fire. Circles, lines, and dots that formed a repeating symbol. She pointed to the pattern, then to the sky. He understood, and it was her signal code. She was trying to call her homeworld. Eli leaned forward, drawing a small shape of his own and a broken antenna. Then he pointed to the beacon. Her eyes widened, and she nodded quickly, excitement flickering across her tired face. She spoke fast in her language, pointing to the stars and then making a spiral shape with her hands. Eli understood bits. Light. Distance, call, home. She needed a power core. Something strong enough to send a message across the galaxy. He realized then that his old ship, buried in the canyon behind his camp, might still have one. The next morning, before sunrise, Eli prepared to leave. Lyra stood near the edge of the valley, watching him quietly. She didn't want him to go, he could see it in her eyes, but she didn't stop him either. Instead, she walked up to him and placed something in his hand. It was a small blue crystal shaped like a drop of light. She said one word softly. "Guide." Then she touched his chest gently and stepped back. Eli nodded. He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he felt its meaning, come back alive. The journey to the wreck was long and harsh. The wind cut like knives, and the air shimmered with radiation from the crash site. The ruins of his old ship lay half buried in the sand. He crawled through the twisted metal and broken glass until he found it, the power core, still intact, glowing faintly beneath the dust. As he reached for it, a jolt of static ran through his body. Pain shot up his arm. He bit his lip, refusing to let go. "Not leaving her alone again," he muttered. He pulled the core free and stumbled out into the light. His hands burned, but he smiled. He had what she needed. By the time he returned, night had fallen. Lyra was waiting near the fire, her eyes full of worry. When she saw the power core in his hands, she gasped and ran toward him. Her glowing fingers brushed over his injured skin, and soft light spread across his arm. The pain faded instantly, replaced by warmth. She looked at him with tears glimmering in her eyes. He smiled weakly and said, "You needed light." She didn't understand the words. But when she gently placed the power core into the beacon's heart, she whispered her own, a soft word that sounded like thank you. The beacon came alive, blue light surged through the air, rising high above the valley like a column of hope. The stars reflected its glow, and for the first time, Lyra's face filled with peace. She looked at him and smiled. But Eli noticed something in the distance, dark shapes moving beyond the horizon. He frowned, the feeling of dread tightening his chest. Lyra followed his gaze, her expression turning serious. She whispered something under her breath, words he couldn't understand but could feel. The signal hadn't only reached her people. It had also reached others. Eli turned toward her, the blue light shining across their faces. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The gift of fire had brought warmth, hope, and connection. But now it had also brought danger. The stars above seemed to shimmer in warning. And as the wind carried the fading hum of the beacon through the valley, Eli realized, sometimes the brightest light also draws the darkest shadows. The search for light, the desert was no longer silent. Since the beacon came alive, the air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. The blue column still reached toward the stars, but now it pulsed unevenly. Something out there had noticed, and something was coming. Eli stood beside Lyra, watching the horizon shimmer with distant flashes. It looked like lightning, but it wasn't. He felt it in his chest, the low hum of approaching ships. Lyra's eyes glowed faintly, fear and hope mixed together. She whispered a word that sounded like signal, pointing to the beacon. He nodded slowly, realizing that her message had gone farther than either of them expected. They didn't know who had heard it first. Her people, or the ones who hunted her. Eli checked his old scanner. The screen flickered with red dots moving closer. He swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the rusted handle of his mining drone. He looked at Lyra, then at the beacon. They couldn't destroy it now. It was the only link to her home. But if they left it running, it would lead danger straight to them. Lyra stepped forward and pressed her hands to the metal surface. Her light spread through the beacon like veins of fire. The hum steadied, the beam sharpened. She turned to him and whispered something. Her voice trembling, he didn't understand every word. But he caught one, protect. Then she pointed to the horizon. Eli nodded, pulling his coat tight and checking the weapon strapped to his leg. He walked toward the ridge, every step heavy in the glowing dust. Behind him, Lyra knelt beside the beacon, working faster than ever. Her energy flared bright blue against the silver sky. Eli reached the ridge just as the first ship broke through the clouds. It wasn't one of hers, its hull was black, rough, and marked with scavenger insignias, pirates. The ship circled above. Engines roaring, sand whipped around him. Burning his face, Eli ducked behind a rock and took a deep breath. He hadn't fought in years, but the old instincts returned quickly. When he looked down the valley, he saw Lyra still kneeling by the beacon. She didn't run, she didn't hide, she kept working. As if trusting him completely, he whispered under his breath, "You're not alone." Then he moved. The pirate ship landed hard, throwing waves of dust into the air. 3 figures stepped out, tall, armored, carrying plasma rifles. They shouted in a harsh language. Scanning the area for the beacon's source, Eli moved through the shadows, his heart pounding. He activated one of his old mining drones and sent it buzzing toward the intruders. The machine exploded in a burst of dust and light. The pirates fired wildly, distracted for a few seconds. Just enough time. Eli sprinted toward the nearest one and swung a heavy wrench across its helmet. The blow cracked metal, and the pirate fell to the ground. The others turned, firing blue bolts that scorched the sand around him. He dove behind a boulder, panting, his arm burning from the heat. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lyra raise both hands. A sudden wave of blue light shot from the beacon, striking one of the pirates and sending him sprawling. Her energy flared brighter than before. Eli stared in shock. She wasn't just an engineer or survivor. She was powerful, far more than he had ever imagined. But the power came with a price. Her body trembled as the light faded. She fell to her knees again. Weak, drained, Eli charged forward, grabbing the last pirate before he could reach her. They struggled in the dust. The pirate's claws raked across his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt, but Eli didn't stop. He twisted the weapon from the pirate's hand and slammed it into the sand. A bright flash lit the valley. When the smoke cleared, the pirates were gone. Only silence remained, and the faint hum of the beacon still glowing above them. Lyra crawled toward him, her face pale, her eyes full of tears. She placed her glowing hands over his wound. Light flowing into his skin, the pain dulled, then vanished. Eli looked at her, breathing hard. "You saved me." She shook her head weakly, touching the ground, pointing at him. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved us." The wind carried the sound of her words away. They sat together in the glowing sand, exhausted but alive. Above them, the stars shifted. One of them flickered brighter. Lyra saw it first and gasped. She grabbed his arm and pointed upward. A ship, smaller and silver, was descending slowly through the atmosphere. Different shape. Different light, not pirates, her people. Tears filled her eyes as she looked back at Eli. He smiled faintly, though his body ached. The signal had worked. She was finally going home. But even as hope filled the air, Eli's heart felt heavy. He knew what her arrival meant. She would leave soon. He stood beside her, the wind tugging at his coat. She touched his arm gently and said something he didn't understand. But her voice was soft, full of sorrow and warmth. He didn't need to know the words. He already knew what she was saying. The silver ship landed at the edge of the valley. Figures in white armor stepped out, rushing toward Lyra. They called her name, their voices echoing through the air. Lyra turned back one last time, looking at him with eyes full of emotion. She took his hand, pressed it to her heart, then whispered, "Eli, light." The beacon behind them pulsed one final time. Its glow spread through the valley, painting everything in soft blue. The message had been sent, the hope restored. But far beyond the light, in the darkness of the dunes, another shadow stirred, when something still watching, still waiting. Eli looked up at the stars, his heart both proud and uncertain. He had found light for her. But he didn't yet know that light would soon change everything. The sky responds. The air trembled as the silver ship descended through the twilight sky. Its engines sang like 1,000 bells, scattering the sand below into spirals of light. Eli shielded his eyes, his heart racing between awe and fear. Beside him, Lyra stood motionless, her eyes wide, reflecting both the glow of the ship and the tears in them. The beacon hummed stronger now, responding to the ship's signal. Blue light and silver mist merged, turning the valley into a sea of color. The wind carried strange voices and gentle, melodic, familiar to Lyra. Her people had come, the ship landed softly. Its ramp unfolding with a slow hiss, figures emerged. Tall, graceful, with the same glowing blue eyes and silver skin as Lyra. They moved like living light, armor shining with faint runes. The first one approached and spoke in her language. Eli couldn't understand the words, but he saw Lyra's face break into tears of joy and relief. They embraced her, checking her injuries, covering her shoulders with a cloak of soft white fabric. She turned, pointing toward Eli. Speaking quickly, the aliens looked at him. Cautious, curious, he raised his hand slowly, showing no weapon, no threat. One of them nodded politely. Bowing slightly, Eli returned the gesture. Unsure what else to do, Lyra walked back toward him. Her steps slow, hesitant. Her expression held happiness, but also something deeper. Sorrow. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched his chest. "Home," she whispered, pointing to the sky, then to herself. Then she looked down, her voice soft. "You come?" Eli's throat tightened. He looked at the glowing ship. Clean, advanced, shining with promise, and then, at his rough shelter on the far ridge, the dust, the loneliness, the silence he had lived in for years. He smiled weakly, shaking his head. "This is my home," he said quietly, knowing she couldn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. Her eyes shimmered with sadness. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the beacon filled the air, still humming softly like a heartbeat. Then one of the aliens approached, speaking to Lyra again, urgency in his tone. She nodded slowly and turned back to Eli. Her eyes glowed faintly brighter as she pressed her hand to his cheek. Her skin was cool, yet her touch felt like fire. "Thank you," she whispered in broken human words. The sound was fragile, but it carried more meaning than any sentence he had ever heard. Eli tried to smile. "You found your light?" he said softly. She tilted her head, the translation lost, but her eyes told him she understood. She turned to leave, following her people toward the ship. Each step felt like the universe pulling her farther from him, and yet even as she walked away, she kept looking back. Her hand lifted once more in a silent promise, not of farewell but of return. Eli watched until the ship's lights dimmed and the engines began to rise. Dust swirled around him, his coat whipping in the wind. The ship ascended slowly, the hum deepening, and then, a sudden, sharp alarm rang from the beacon. Its blue light flickered violently. Turning red, Eli turned in shock. Lyra spun around, shouting something to her crew. The air split with a thunderous crack. Out of the clouds above, a dark shape emerged. Another ship, larger, jagged, black as oil. The pirates had followed the same signal. They weren't gone. They had only been waiting for her people to arrive. Blaster fire ripped through the air, striking the sand near Eli's feet. He dove for cover as Lyra's people shouted orders, blue shields flaring to life around them. The peaceful reunion turned into chaos. Lyra ran toward the beacon, shouting something. Her hands glowing bright again, Eli saw what she was doing. She was trying to overload it, to make it explode and destroy the signal before it could be traced again. He sprinted toward her, dodging fire and debris. The ground shook as the two ships exchanged beams of light and thunder. He reached her just as the beacon began to crack. "Stop!" he shouted instinctively, even though she couldn't understand. She looked at him, her eyes full of tears and light. "No choice," she whispered, her hands pressed deeper into the beacon's surface. Eli grabbed her shoulders, shaking his head. She smiled faintly. "You bring fire," she said, and then pushed him away with surprising strength. A blinding flash followed. Blue light swallowing the valley, Eli fell back, the sound of the explosion echoing like 1,000 stars breaking. When he opened his eyes, the world was silent again. The pirate ship was gone, scattered in pieces across the desert. The silver ship hovered above, engines damaged but alive. And at the center of the crater, the beacon lay shattered. Lyra knelt beside it, breathing hard, her light flickering faintly. Eli crawled toward her, his voice hoarse. "Lyra!" She turned weakly, smiling through tears. The glow in her eyes was fading, but peace shone brighter than fear. She placed her trembling hand over his heart. "Home," she whispered again. Then she closed her eyes, her body glowing one last time before going still. Eli held her in silence, the sky still burning with silver light above. He looked up as her people gathered around, their voices soft with grief and gratitude. One of them placed a hand on his shoulder, bowing deeply. He didn't need words, and he knew they understood what he had done. As the ship rose again, carrying Lyra's people back to the stars, Eli stood alone beneath the quiet sky. The beacon was gone, but a faint blue spark still shimmered in the sand. Her final gift, he picked it up, holding it close, and whispered softly, "The sky answered, but it also took you with it." The wind carried his words away, and far above, the stars pulsed once, as if they had heard what she was missing. The valley was silent again. Days had passed since the explosion, yet the blue shimmer still lingered faintly in the air. Eli walked across the quiet sand, each step leaving a mark that the wind refused to erase. He carried with him the last glowing shard of the beacon, Lyra's final gift. It pulsed softly, as if breathing, as if alive. The nights had grown cold, but he no longer feared the silence. He had grown used to listening, not for voices or engines, but for the echoes of memories. When the wind passed through the broken stones, it almost sounded like her hum. When the stars flickered, he imagined her smile reflecting back from them, She was gone, yet somehow still there, in everything that glowed or sang. Eli rebuilt his shelter near the crater, but this time he didn't build it alone. Around him stood the remains of Lyra's structure, the curved stone still marked with her light symbols. He cleaned them carefully, arranged them in a circle again, not as a beacon, not as a machine, but as a home. Each night, he placed the glowing shard in the center. Its soft blue light filled the valley like a heartbeat. He sat beside it, whispering stories to the stars. Stories about a girl from another world who built more than a beacon. She built a bridge between hearts. Sometimes he wondered if her people ever made it safely back. If they remembered him, the strange human on a forgotten world who helped one of their own. Maybe they told her story among their kind. Maybe they carried her name through the galaxies. And maybe somewhere far away Lyra's spirit still listened, smiling at the sound of his voice carried by the wind. One evening, as the suns dipped below the ridge, Eli noticed something strange, small lights moving across the horizon. He stood, shielding his eyes. At first, he thought it was another ship, but the lights were small and soft. Like fireflies, they floated toward him, swirling gently around the crater. When they touched the stones, they glowed brighter, forming faint symbols, the same ones Lyra had once carved. Eli's breath caught. The shard in his hand pulsed in rhythm with them. He knelt, placing it in the sand, and suddenly the entire circle came alive. Blue light spread outward in a calm wave, gentle and warm. For a moment he felt her presence, unfaint but real. A whisper in the wind, soft and familiar. Eli. He closed his eyes, smiling through tears. Lyra, he whispered back. The air shimmered like morning dew, and then the lights faded slowly into the stars. But Eli no longer felt empty. He understood now, she hadn't truly left. Her light had simply gone home, but a piece of it had stayed behind. From that night onward, the valley became alive again. Tiny blue plants began to grow near the crater. Feeding on the residual energy of the beacon, the air warmed, and new life appeared. Creatures that glowed faintly like Lyra's eyes. Eli tended them carefully, speaking to them as if they were old friends. It was as though the universe itself was giving him company. A quiet thank you for what he had done sometimes. When the wind grew strong and carried the dust high into the air, he would stand on the ridge and look toward the heavens. The stars stretched endlessly above him, and somewhere among them, he believed, was a world where a silver-skinned girl once spoke his name. A world that now knew what humanity was truly capable of. Not destruction, not greed, but kindness one day. Many months later, a new ship appeared in the sky, sleek, silver, familiar. Eli stood as it descended, his heart pounding. From the ship stepped three beings, Lyra's people again, their faces solemn yet peaceful. One of them approached and handed him a small device. Inside it glowed a memory crystal, blue like her eyes. He activated it with trembling fingers. A projection filled the air. Lyra's face, smiling softly, her voice echoed, faint but clear. Eli, my light, thank you. He froze, the words wrapping around him like warmth after years of winter. The message continued, her telling him she lived, that she remembered, that her people had rebuilt the beacon network in her name, and that the valley he guarded had become sacred among them, the valley of fire and hope. When the message ended, Eli laughed quietly. Tears slipping down his cheeks, he looked up at the visitors, who bowed deeply before returning to their ship. As it rose again into the heavens, he whispered softly, "Safe journey." Lyra, the valley glowed once more that night. The shard pulsed brighter than ever, lighting the stones in a circle around him. Eli sat in the middle, watching the stars twinkle above. He realized that home wasn't a place, it wasn't walls or machines or even the sky. Home was the feeling he carried, the connection that lived between hearts. He smiled, leaning back against the stones. The wind whispered through the sand, carrying her voice once again, and as the twin suns rose together, painting the valley in gold and blue, Eli whispered softly to the horizon, "You were never missing a home, Lyra." He smiled, eyes glimmering with tears and light. "You were missing someone who cared enough to build one with you." The light from the shard flared one last time, bright and pure, then faded gently, leaving behind peace, warmth, and memory. And in that quiet moment under endless stars, the lonely human finally understood. Humanity's greatest power was never strength or technology. It was the simple, timeless gift of compassion.